This happened back in 1989, and the story involves my stepdad, biological dad, Donald Duck, and my sister, Sis. The person who exacted the revenge has passed now, so it should be safe to relate. And this is a revenge story that would warrant prison time, I believe. I was living outside the country when it happened, so my sister relayed all this information to me about a year after, and we recently got together and went over the events again. So my biological parents married when they were very young, and Donald Duck was still in law school. The marriage lasted long enough to produce 2 children. They didn't waste time in those days. My sister, who was 14 months, my elder, and myself. They were divorced before I was born. And Donald was a serial cheater, a pathological liar, and a total asshole. He still is at least a liar and an AR. He's in his mid-70s now, so maybe not doing much cheating anymore, but the fact that he is still working as a lawyer, I think has indicated that he was never a good one, and he doesn't have enough to retire. I've looked at reviews on him online, and it's funny to see that most reviewers say that he is not only a terrible lawyer, but a horrible person. When Sis was 22, she was a single mother, and my nephew, her son, was around 3. Her company transferred her to another state, and she discovered that Donald Duck lived in a town near her new work location, and thought that he might be able to help her get out of bearings in a new place. For a short time when we were teenagers, we had some sporadic involvements in our lives after moving to a neighboring city. It was mostly him trying to impress us with how cool and rich he thought we should think he was. So though it has been a few years since she had seen him, it was not like they were strangers. In any case, Donald Duck agreed to let Sis move into his apartment with him, his girlfriend at the time, of course. Many years his junior, and her 9-month-old child, not Donald's, until she was able to find her place. He also offered to allow her to keep her belongings in his storage unit. Says took him up on his offer. Never did Donald Duck make any reference to being paid for the use of the storage unit or paying for utilities at the apartment. Says stayed for 3 months and did her best to get out as quickly as she could. And as far as she could once, she became more familiar with the area. Living with him was hard. Did I mention he was an asshole? And her young son would find his pregnant lady porno mags around the apartment. This is pre-internet. Mr. Duck's young girlfriend was able to help with babysitting, something Sis paid her for. Eventually, she got her apartment. But all of her things, her son's toys, her furniture, household items, and everything. But her bed was still in the storage unit. So she called him to figure out how she could get her things back. But he seemed to want to hang on to them for some reason. He said, "You are my girlfriend's money for babysitting, and you can't get your things back until you pay her." She said, "Have you talked to her?" "I've paid her everything I owed her." He put down the phone and talked to his girlfriend, and she confirmed that she had been paid. And then he said, "Well, you owe 1/3 of the utilities for the time you were here." She reminded them that he had never said anything about that. So he got a little heated, and she was feeling desperate and angry. She then shouted an accusation of something he did to her when she was very young, which is a different story. And he responded, "Have you ever told anyone that?" "No," she said. "If you ever do, I will break your neck," he said. And the conversation ended there. She had given up and thought she would never see her things again. When about 20 minutes later, she got a call from an acquaintance who had gone on 1 or 2 dates with Donald before she met my sister. She told Sis that Mr. Duck just called her, asking if Sis had ever told her anything he might have done to Sis, hinting at the accusation Sis had made since I had never told anyone, and the acquaintance told Donald as much. Sis later calls my stepdad, whom we have always is considered to be our dad, and he was the only father we knew growing up, as he was in the picture before we were old enough to remember. He married my mom when I was an infant, and my sister a toddler, and they were together for many years until my mom's death. The guy's had a lot of faults. He passed away in 2017, and we often felt better when he wasn't around. But he tried. It's not easy raising someone else's kids. He was our dad as far as we were concerned, and he'd legally adopted us. He had a lot of issues, but he hated to see anyone being taken advantage of if they were in a weaker position. In other words, he hated a bully, and Donald Duck was being a bully. When I was in the 1st grade, I rode a school bus with middle and high school students. There were a couple of kids who would bully me, and when he found out, he confronted the bullies and dads, and it ended. Another time, I was in 3rd grade and driving somewhere with him in his pickup around town, and he saw 2 young teenagers destroying a bicycle that he assumed they had stolen. He stopped and confronted them with his big framing hammer. Years later, he broke my mom out of a mental institution by threatening the director, or some doctor, I'm not sure, with that same hammer. Yes, we were a fun family. Anyway, when Sis called him explaining that Donald Duck was holding all of her possessions hostage, she didn't know what to do. He told her that he knew several crisps who would be happy to rough him up and wouldn't even want to be paid. They would just do it for the fun. He was very bothered that Donald was keeping his grandson's things from him and wanted to hurt Mr. Duck. But Sis declined his offer. Then he asked her, what is the thing he values most in the world? His car. She said his car at that point was a Porsche. He had purchased new just a few years before. It wasn't quite the absolute entry-level model, but pretty close. Of course, he had all kinds of arguments about why it was better than more expensive ones, and obviously it was red. Dad was trying to come up with a way to not only get revenge, but to scare Mr. Duck enough to force him to give Sis back her things. She said she was fine with whatever he wanted to do if it got her belongings back, but wanted to make sure none of it could be traced back to her. So nothing happened until about a month later, and Donald Duck called Sis out of the blue as if nothing had happened and asked, "Hey, when would you like to come get your things? How about this Saturday?" He had some change of heart that is unexplained to this day, so she said, sure. She didn't trust him, so she didn't want to go alone. She was able to get a male friend to go with her, and she got a U-Haul, picked up her stuff, and got out. That very same evening, she tried several times to call Dad to let him know that she got her things back, and all was well. No need for any drastic measures. But it was too late. The wheels had been set in motion. He never answered the phone. Remember, these are pre-cell phone days, so when you're not at home, you don't answer. Sis called Mom, who was living separately from Dad for a time. It's complicated, and told her she couldn't reach Dad. Mom said Dad was sick, and that's probably why he wasn't answering his phone. But then at 10:30 p.m., Sis got a call from Donald's girlfriend who asked her, "What are you doing?" "I'm at home in bed. Why?" She said someone just blew up Donald's car. My sister's heart dropped. She knew who did it. The police asked Donald who would want to do this to him, and he says his name. So she now becomes suspect number one. Sis asked their girlfriend if Donald was scared, and girlfriend said yes. They were spending the night in a hotel. Fortunately, the call from my girlfriend to Sis just a few minutes after the explosion gave us her alibi. Sis lived over 30 minutes away and couldn't have answered her home phone if she had been the one to ignite the bomb. But the bomb did its job well. It had turned the Porsche into an unrecognizable wreck, took out the adjacent car, and destroyed many feet of the carport above both cars. I'm guessing the tank in a Porsche was nearly full. Just after Sis got off the phone, she called Mom telling her that someone blew up Mr. Duck's car, and she thinks it was Dad. While she was on the phone with Mom, another call came in, and it was Dad. He said mysteriously, "There's a box outside your door. Bring it in. You never talked to me tonight." Sis was a little afraid to open the box, but it turned out just to be some of her son's items that he had left with his grandpa's clothes and toys. Months later at Christmas, Sis asked Dad about it and he confessed. Turned out he was very sick physically when he pulled that stunt. Sis was touched that he would go through so much effort and risk jail time for her, all while being ill. She asked him if he was scared of driving back, and he said yes, and that every headlight behind him he took to be a cop until he reached the state line. Sis found out from their girlfriend that the cop said the job was very amateur, certainly not the work of a professional, but hey, it did the job. That Todd said he had asked a coworker who was once a member of the after-mentioned Crisps about how to make a car bomb, and she instructed him. He always did love blowing things up. When I was 13, we bonded over crumpling up the old colored sparklers into powder. I don't think they make the colored ones anymore, but they burned hotter, and we funneled the powder into the spent CO2 cart used, and making bombs powerful enough to blow up those old metal milk cans that hold a few gallons. We did this for the 4th of July. Anyway, Sis said it was some sort of Molotov cocktail stuffed in the tailpipe, but I'm not sure how that would work. My idea of a Molotov cocktail is a 750 milliliter sized bottle like a wine bottle or a fifth of booze, which would not fit into the tailpipe of a 4-cylinder Porsche. I'm guessing the diameter is no more than 2 inches, not big enough to fit such a bottle. Maybe he used a similar bottle or simply a smaller container of some kind filled with something very ignitable. I truly regret not discussing it with him. But we weren't close since I left home. If you didn't need him, he had a hard time having a relationship with you. Plus, I was married to a woman for many years who kept me from my parents and siblings, so I don't have better details. Thank God that 25-year marriage is over, and my current wife loves my family. One hilarious detail. Donald Duck continued to father offspring and date very young women. His current wife is my age, exactly, and he has a daughter many years younger than my youngest child. A couple of years ago, I had a conversation with one of these half-sisters, and she's a marvelous person despite half her DNA. Her mother was never married to Donald, and this sister is the age of my youngest daughter. I told her the story of the exploded Porsche, and she found it very amusing, because she said Donald loves to tell a story about he was prosecuting some mob boss and a couple of thugs came to his door trying to threaten him. Of course, being the big, bad, brave man he is, he didn't back down. And what was his reward? Those thugs blew up his car. I think it's hilarious that he tells this story to his children. But now they know the truth. He's the biggest bullshitter I've ever met. Also, due to Donald's allegations that it was my sister who blew up his car, the condo association or whatever tried to sue my sister.
September 11th, 2001 is a day that went down in history for not only America, but for the entire world. Even here in Canada, we felt the impact of that event. But personally, that day stands out for an entirely different reason. At the time I was 12 years old, living in the Alberta countryside, where the biggest excitement was spotting a moose on the back roads. I'd woken up that day and decided that I didn't want to go to school, so I put on a severe cough and rubbed my eyes extra hard to make them look puffy. Then I told my mom I was feeling sick. She bought it, probably because Dad was out of town, and she had her hands full at the pharmacy she was working at. I stayed in bed until I heard her car leaving the driveway. As soon as she was gone, I slipped on my boots and jacket, then snuck out the back door. The woods behind our neighborhood stretched on for miles. I've explored them hundreds of times before, building forts and pretending I was the Canadian Indiana Jones, eh? That morning, I figured I'd hike up the old creek bed, maybe skip some rocks. I must have wandered further than usual, following a deer trail that twisted deeper into the thicket. The trees got denser, blocking out the sun. Everything became quiet. Too quiet. No birds chirping, no squirrels rustling. That's when I saw them. A series of tents. Not the colorful camping ones you would see at the park. These were big, white, industrial looking, like the ones you see in disaster movies. They were clustered together in a clearing, maybe a dozen of them, with thick plastic sheeting and metal frames, hoses snaked between them, connected to generators humming low. It looked like a makeshift quarantine site. Curious, I crept closer, heart pounding like a drum inside my chest. There were these crates stacked outside one tent, labeled with words that I didn't understand. A weird smell hung in the air, like bleach mixed with something rotten. I peeked around the tree, and that's when I saw them. Two men in full hazmat suits, the kind with hoods and masks. They were hauling a heavy bag between them. One of them turned to look at me. All three of us froze in place. Then I heard muffled shouting. They then dropped the bag and reached for their waists, pulling out handguns. The first shot cracked through the air, splintering bark off the tree beside me. I yelped, ducking low as another bullet whizzed past, thudding into the dirt. Panic overwhelmed me. I bolted, crashing through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face. My lungs burned, legs pumping as fast as I could. More shots rang out behind me. I ran until my sides ached. I collapsed behind a fallen log, gasping, tears streaming down my face. I hid there for hours, shaking, until the sun started dipping low. I then made my way back home. Later on, when Mom came back, I didn't say a word. How could I? Beside the fact that she would have been upset about me being out in the forest when I should have been sick in bed, what happened in New York that day had her glued to the TV. It sounded crazy, even to me. That night, as I laid in bed, staring up at the ceiling, replaying it all in my mind, the tents, the suits, the guns, I overheard my mom on the phone in the living room. She was talking to my dad. "Yeah, I heard about it when I was at work. Just awful. James stayed home today because he was feeling sick." After talking to my dad for a while longer, she mentioned something very strange. Apparently she passed about 8 garbage trucks going the opposite way on the 2-lane highway that leads directly to our neighborhood. The only other thing that way is a public park. Dump sites aren't anywhere near this area. A chill crawled up my spine. 8 garbage trucks coming from the direction of the woods? Years later, I tried to look into it, but nothing ever came up. No reports, no investigations, nothing. The only thing anyone was interested in back then was the attack on the World Trade Center. I am in no way suggesting that what I encountered in the woods had anything to do with that event. I'm not really sure what the hell was going on back there, but it was important enough to shoot at a kid and then pack everything up into garbage trucks and leave as quickly as possible.
I'm 24 and I do house sitting on the side whenever I need extra money. I found most of my jobs through an app and had done it probably 15 times before this with 0 issues. This house was the nicest one I'd ever been hired for. One of those gated neighborhoods where every lawn looks perfect and every car in the driveway costs more than you'll ever make in a year or two. The couple who hired me were in their 60s, going to France for 3 weeks. The wife had called me once before the job and she seemed totally normal, organized and friendly. Left me a printed sheet on the counter with everything I needed to know. Water the orchards every 3 days, bring in the mail, the pool guy comes Wednesday, and the guest room upstairs was made up for me. Simple stuff, really. The first 2 days were genuinely great. The bed was nicer than mine at home, the kitchen was stocked, and the neighborhood was dead quiet. I worked my remote job during the day and sat by the pool at night. Pretty easy money. On the 3rd day I went to water the orchards, and the soil was already wet. I stood there for probably a full minute just holding the pod. I hadn't watered them yet. I knew I hadn't because I'd been putting it off and had a reminder set on my phone for that exact morning. I tried to come up with explanations. Maybe some kind of irrigation system. Maybe I was misremembering. I put it down and walked away. That same evening I opened the fridge and things had been moved around. I know how that sounds, but I'm weirdly specific about how I organize a refrigerator, and I had rearranged this one when I got there. The orange juice I kept on the left was on the right. Leftovers I'd pushed to the back or at the front. I checked every door and window in that house. Everything was locked. The alarm panel showed no entries, alerts, or anything. I called my friend and talked for about an hour, and she convinced me I was just in an unfamiliar place and my brain was just doing too much. I went to bed and mostly believed that. At 2 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of a door closing somewhere below me. I laid there without moving and just listened. Nothing after that. I told myself it was the house settling or the pool equipment outside. I laid there for maybe 20 more minutes and then got up because I wasn't going to sleep without checking. I went through the whole upstairs first. Empty. Went downstairs and through the living room and kitchen and dining room. Everything also looked fine. Then I walked past the basement door and stopped. There was a thin line of light underneath it. I had tried that door my first day and it was locked. The instructions said nothing about the basement. I just assumed it was storage and left it alone. I stood in that hallway staring at that line of light and I genuinely could not move for a few seconds. I went back upstairs, locked my bedroom door, pushed the dresser against it, and texted the emergency number I'd been given, asking if anybody else had access to the house. A few minutes later my phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. A man answered, said he was the husband, said they hadn't been able to make the France trip and had come home 2 days ago, said his wife meant to message me and forgot, and also said they'd been in the master bedroom and were trying to give me my space. I asked him why he didn't just knock on my door and say hello when they got back. He paused. Then they said they didn't want to make things awkward. I asked about the light under the basement door. Another pause, but much longer. Said it was just a utility light that stays on all the time. I sat there in the dark on that bed and something just would not let me relax about any of it. The pauses and the answers that were just a little too weird. The idea that two people had been moving around that house for 2 days while I slept, going into the kitchen, watering the plants, close enough to walk into any room they wanted. I told him I'd be heading out in the morning. He said he understood and I'd be paid the full amount. I didn't sleep at all. At 6 in the morning, I packed everything, moved the dresser, and walked downstairs. I was almost at the front door when I looked down the hallway. The basement door was open, just a few inches. The light was off this time, and there was somebody standing just inside it in the dark, not moving, just standing there in the gap watching me from across the hallway without making a sound. I walked out the front door and drove straight home. When I reported it, the app found that the account used to hire me was fake. They tracked down the real owners to the address. The actual people had been in France the entire time. They had no idea anyone was in their house. Whoever hired me was not them. I don't know who was in that house. I don't know how many of them there were. I don't know what was in that basement or how long they had been living there before I showed up or what they actually wanted. I just know that whatever was standing in that doorway at 6 in the morning had been there the whole time I was asleep upstairs. Yet it never once made a sound.
I want to keep my name private, so you can call me Crimson. I live in a small town, and I've been watching your videos for over 2 years now. Honestly, I never thought I'd end up having a story of my own to submit. This happened about a week ago. It was the final exam day of my senior year in high school. For some reason, all the students from my school had to take the exams at a different school. That school wasn't very big, just one 4-story building, and each floor had its own bathroom. It was the very last exam, and during the test I drank a lot of water. As soon as it ended, and I stepped out into the hallway, I suddenly really had to pee. I went to the girls' bathroom on my floor, but it was packed. I thought about going downstairs, but I figured it would probably be just as crowded. I was taking my exam on the 3rd floor, and I knew there weren't many students assigned to the 4th floor, so I decided to head up there instead. The 4th floor was completely dark, all the lights were off. Every classroom door was locked, and it was hard to see anything. At least it was daytime, so there was a little bit of light coming in through the windows. As I walked toward the bathroom, I thought I saw something out of the corner of my eye, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there. I wear glasses, and I sometimes misinterpret things, so I brushed it off and went inside. I opened one of the stalls, stepped in, locked the door, and started doing my business. That's when I heard footsteps, someone else entering the bathroom. I didn't think much of it. I assumed another student had the same idea I did and came up to the quiet 4th floor. A little while later, I finished, stood up, fixed my clothes, and flushed the toilet. When I turned around to open the stall door, something caught my eye. I could see feet through the gap under the door. Someone was standing right outside my stall. I thought about opening the door, but something deep in my gut told me not to. Then I slowly lifted my gaze, and for a split second, it looked like someone's head was rising above the top of the stall door, like they were trying to peer down at me. I remember thinking, there's no way someone that tall should exist. I wanted to tell them to leave. I wanted to say anything, but my throat locked up. All I could do was stare at the feet. They looked way too big to be normal, and whoever it was, they weren't wearing any shoes. The skin was extremely dark, almost black. I stood there for what felt like 5 minutes. They didn't move. It was like they were waiting for me to open the door. Then suddenly, I heard 2 female teachers talking outside the bathroom, and just like that, the feet were gone. I let out a shaky breath and waited another couple of minutes before finally stepping out of the stall. I washed my hands and left the bathroom. Before going back downstairs, I glanced down the hallway. One of the classroom doors was open. I'm certain it had been closed when I first came up. I decided not to think about it and went back down. The exams were over, and I actually did pretty well. But ever since that day, I can't stop thinking about what or who was standing outside that stall. And I keep wondering, if I had opened that door, I might have come face to face with it.